Welcome new and old friends. My name is 2482, and today 42 got us 4 horror stories. 2 are by Sugar-soad, and 2 are by Cryptic Wanderer. So, turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky.
"You fucking psycho sadist!" the man screamed at his torturer. "Masochist!" the other man gleefully corrected as he freed his captive and handed him a barbed bat.
The Devil Runs a Restaurant in Ireland by Sugar-soad. You're probably reading this and thinking, I'm batshit crazy, and will retort with the Tooth Fairy runs a dry cleaner in Istanbul. But honestly, it's a well-known fact that he runs a small little restaurant in Ireland. No one is exactly sure when it originally opened, as most of the locals are claiming that they have been going there since they were children. Most of us agree that it happened in 2000. The restaurant is called The Swift and is in a town called Virginia. From the outside, it looks like a dilapidated building that is on the brink of falling apart. On the inside, it looks like one of the world's best fine dining restaurants. The devil is actually quite down to earth and usually greets every new customer at the door with a hearty smile and a handshake. Most customers are a bit standoffish with him, but he quickly wins them over. Most of the locals have worked there as teenagers, as it was a decent wage, and you got treated fairly. The devil would always look out for any of his employees and would treat them as family. I remember a couple of incidents where I realized that it was not a good idea to piss off the devil. The first incident was one of the girls, Mary, came in with a black eye. We all knew that her boyfriend Darren was an asshole, but we didn't realize that he was hitting her. I could practically see the steam raising from the devil as he found out what happened. Darren disappeared later that day, with the only evidence being a small, smoldering burn in his house. No one missed him when he was gone. The other incident was the reason that all of the locals loved the devil. There was a little old lady named Miss Smith, who was in her 80s, who would frequent the restaurant. The devil would always give her the best table and refuse her money when she tried to pay. One day she came in weeping and we all rushed to see if she was okay. We found out that someone had broken into her home and stolen all of her jewelry. She had tried to report it to the police, but they were unable to do anything about it. We all had our suspicions about who robbed her, as the Donnelly brothers were notorious for pulling shit like this. 2 days later, their remains were found spread across a 5-mile radius in dozens of locations. The local police tried to interview the devil, but all of the locals claimed to have seen him working at the time. Their deaths were later ruled an accident, as the lead detective used to work for the devil. Everyone claimed that justice was served, and Miss Smith got her jewelry back. You should never judge a book by its cover, as you never know what a person is actually like.
Pryor, you idiot!" the lead surgeon screamed at me on my first day.
Geez, fine, alright. I cowered while administering the painkiller about halfway through the liver transplant. The Old Magician's Hat by Cryptic Wander. The year came and went to Karen's delight. She watched as the first flakes fell in the night. He promised they would come back again someday. That silly snowman who had to go away. She gathered her friends who were just as delighted. Then they ran for the train station completely excited. The sign up above said no more were expected. But as they walked back home, they were corrected. The magical train sent by Santa himself chugged its way down the line, drove by an elf. The children all shouted because they could see the snowman himself, their old friend Frosty. "Happy birthday," he yelled as they ran up to greet him, but Josh ran too fast, trying to beat them. He tripped on his laces that were always untied. "Oh no, stop the train!" everyone cried. Alas, it was too late for that poor young boy. His body lay limply, like that of a toy. "Give me your hat," little Karen demanded, and Frosty changed back once the garment was handed. They watched and they waited as the minutes trickled by. They couldn't stop crying from seeing Josh die. The magic of the hat was doing no good. So they all turned to leave, then stopped where they stood. "Happy birthday," a voice came from behind, and a look of terror took over when they turned to find Josh was still dead, his body was mangled, but it didn't stop him from rising, then Charlie was strangled. Josh ripped the flesh from his former friend's face, and when he was dead, he rose in his place. As 2 turned into 4, turned to 6, and then to 10, the children turned their sights on both women and men. When the carolers noticed and turned to run home, they tripped and got tangled like hair in a comb. The creatures were on them as quickly as a flash. Their songs turned to screams as they chomped and they gnashed. Sirens rang out as the police cars pulled up. The creatures go down as the gunshots erupt. Not for real long though, as they just wouldn't die. They sprang their way over as quick as a sigh. Gunfire rang out, feeding their dread. The men would come back after being shot in the head. They rose and joined the ranks of the ghouls. The town was in chaos, there were no more rules. The town was fenced off and the military came through, but they were too late, so sad but so true. The living were eaten, and the dead reigned supreme, but at least Santa had the next year off, it seemed. I looked up at the finished product and admired my work as he screamed. Being a taxidermist during the zombie apocalypse is the best thing ever. I wish to have my own theme song by Sugar-soad. I've always been a little bit quirky. I like things that most other people would consider weird. I don't really care what people think of me, as I am happy with who I am. The other night, I was staring out the window when I wished that I had a theme song that only I could hear. I have no idea what put the thought in my head, but it just seemed like fun. I have no idea how it happened, but my wish came true. The next morning, I woke up and was greeted with a really cheerful music. I initially thought it was coming from my phone, but I eventually realized what was going on. I had the best day of my life that day, as the music kept changing depending on what I was doing. I have never been so happy in my life, and I probably got a lot of odd looks from people due to the way I was acting. None of them could hear my music, and it was exhilarating. I got home that evening and was in such a high that I could barely sit down. I heard the keys in the door and rushed forward to tell my boyfriend Steve my brilliant news. I stopped in my tracks when I locked eyes with Steve as the music took a very menacing tone. I didn't know how to react as the music got darker and more ominous as he locked the door and came over to hug me. I stood there stiff as a board as he wrapped his arms around me. The music was now deafening, and it was beyond terrifying. He disengaged from me, and he looked concerned. He asked me if I was okay, and I assured him that I was fine. I slowly moved away into the bedroom as the music took on a lighter tone. I have no idea how to process what was going on, and decided to ignore the music. I have known Steve for years, and he wouldn't hurt a fly. I was still sitting there contemplating what to do when Steve came in with a glass of water. He handed it to me and said he got this as I looked to faint earlier. The music was practically exploding my eardrums with how menacing it had become. I slowly took a drink and thanked him. I sat there for a few more moments before deciding to go for a walk to clear my head. I tried to get to my feet, but fell onto the ground. I was starting to have difficulty keeping my eyes open and looked in horror at the glass of water. The music had taken a more somber tone, so I lay there on the ground trying to keep my eyes open. Steve walked back into the room and smiled down at me. I glanced in dread at the steak knife he had clutched in his hands. He kneeled down beside me and whispered in my ear, "I can hear the music too," before slicing the knife across my throat. The last thing I heard was him singing, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." Your personal data has been collected and sold for a grand total of 13 cents. You may now proceed to enjoy Facebook. Wonderful Tonight by Cryptic Wander. Gloria rifled through the various dresses in her closet. She needed to pick just the right one for tonight's party. It was only once a year, and as always, she needed to be the belle of the ball. After some time, she finally decided on one made of soft black velvet. It went down about mid-thigh and complemented the paleness of her skin. She then made her way over to her makeup desk and began to powder her face. The black, rotten spots were blending quite nicely, and when she was satisfied, she uncapped a tube of red lipstick. Slowly and methodically, she applied it to above her teeth, along the gum line, as she no longer had any lips. She reached for an old brush and ran it through her long, blonde hair. It had thinned considerably, and clumps of it stuck to the brush, still attached to patches of dry scalp. She checked herself over a few more times and nodded in approval. Her skeletal gaze slowly turned and fell upon Brandon, who had been locked in a cage for the last 5 days. Like sand moving through parchment, her voice rasped out. "Do I look all right?" she asked. It was hard to tell what her expression was, as both meat and flesh had rotten and dried long ago. He could still sense a sort of mocking smile coming from her. She knew how terrified he was, and she was soaking up every bit of it. His beaten and abused body was a reminder that he better answer her pretty quickly, lest he be punished by her abnormally strong fists once again. "Yes," he says. His tone sounded as though he was close to tears. The shaking in his voice did nothing to hide his fear. "You look wonderful tonight." The living dead had long since taken over the world, and humans were kept in pens like animals raised for slaughter. They were not mindless, as everyone had predicted from fiction. On the contrary, they were quite intelligent. They did, however, still ingest human flesh, and whether or not they gained anything from it was unknown. In fact, there was quite a bit that remained unknown, much like their origins. It wasn't a virus that infected people. They just simply sat up one day and began to kill. They had a meanness to them as well, and enjoyed toying with their meals. Tonight's party was one such instance. She rose from her seat, her black dress swaying around her long dead body, and unlocked the door to his cage. He knew it was useless to try and fight. Death seemed to make these creatures far stronger than a human, and the beating that would follow would simply not be worth it. No, his best odds would be to behave, and try to live as long as she would allow. Picking up a leashed collar, her thin fingers placed it around his neck and clicked it into place. "It's time, my dear. Be a good little pet, and I might keep you around a little bit longer," she said, giving something like a smirk and pulling him forward. Gloria led Brandon down a long corridor, and already he could hear the sound of instruments being played quite masterfully. Mumbles, both loud and soft, coming from the same direction. And upon reaching the landing at the top of the grand staircase, the true horror of his situation set in. Below them, a large group of ghouls dressed in all sorts of finery looked up to greet them. Former men and women of various states of decomposition turned their attentions up and began to glamour over Gloria's beauty. They marveled at their queen as the two of them made their slow descent into the ocean of ghouls. They were not alone, though. Attached to leashes in a similar fashion were other humans, forced to play along in their sick game. Most of them wore bland, burlap clothes, although some had been dressed up in silly clown or animal costumes. They all looked just as terrified as Brandon, and in some cases, their dates have already begun nipping pieces of them off and offering to share. That isn't to say they weren't the Hodowa, however. Other humans were chained to various pillars around the room. Already, they were missing fingers and large area of flesh. Brandon had to look away as a rather dapper-looking corpse wearing a top hat and a monocle over an eyeless socket bit deep into a poor man's nose. Blood poured out like a fountain, giving him the appearance of one of them himself. The band of corpses once more picked up their instruments and began to play the Blue Danube by Johann Strauss. The beautiful waltz music was harmonized with the sounds of screams from all around, and Gloria wrapped her bony fingers around his. She forced his other hand around her emaciated body, and the two proceeded to dance. They played more of her favorite tunes, and the room of monsters continued their dancing, jokes, and devouring the living at an agonizing pace. Gloria leaned her petrified face into Brandon's and opened her mouth. The black, dead tongue were just well enough to ask, "Do you feel all right?" Those horrific eyes bored deep into his, like a snake playing with its prey. The thought of sick mockery worming its way into his brain, and he struggled to make eye contact. Swallowing hard, as the sweat dripped down his face, he lied, "Yes, I feel wonderful with you, Gloria." She knew his extreme discomfort and relished it. "Tell me more," she rasped out. Brandon was queasy from looking at the details on her face. Stale air from the hole where her nose used to be seemed to permeate all around him. But to look away was just as bad. All around, blood continued to paint the floor as the food was consumed. He swallowed a gag, coming so close to throwing up, but that would have been his last mistake he ever made. "Your skin is so smooth. I love everything about you," he managed to quickly spit out, and she seemed pleased. The night quickly got late, and before long it was time to retire to their rooms with what was left of their dates. Brandon was extremely lucky so far, as some of the other humans were now missing hands, and even organs in some cases. She pulled him harshly along by the leash back to her room. Instead of throwing him back in his cage, he was shoved to the bed. 4 shackles were locked on each one of his limbs by the bed corner, and he began to sob. "Please don't kill me. I don't want to die. I just want to serve you. Didn't I do all right?" Gloria slipped off her dress, exposing a disturbing amount of ribs and long dead organs. She climbed on top of him, her dry flesh scraping against his skin. Making an odd kind of sushing noise, she placed a finger to his lips. She reached over to the lamp, and then she tells him as she turns out the light, "Oh, my darling, you'll taste wonderful tonight." Our dairy farm still prints photos of missing children on all of our milk cartons. It's educational for the consumer to know what each dairy cow was fed. I do hope you enjoyed these stories today. If you did, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. I like to thank Sugar-soad and Cryptic Wander for letting me read your stories. They were both very good. I also wanted to say thank you. As of recording, I'm at 587 subscribers on YouTube, and I might even be at 600 by the time this goes out. Thank you everyone who subscribed. It's been really amazing this last month, just how fast I've grown. Thank you guys. Now, if you're a new friend, make sure you subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. If you'd like to help this channel/podcast, share it with anyone who might enjoy it. If you'd like to help in other ways, I do have a Patreon where you get early access to this audio, merch, where of course you get merchandise, and a PayPal if you'd like to just give me a tip or some coffee money. All of this is appreciated and of course never expected. I would also like to take this moment to remind you that I have a website, 242reads.com. It has stories that I have written, links to everything that I have made accounts on, and a few other goodies. I have a link to it in the description and the show notes. Of course, I would also love a comment, so let's get you onto that Sunday word. On screen right now and on Twitter are all the entries I got last week. Thank you guys. The word was reasonable. Now this week's word is preparation. The action of process of making ready or being made ready for use or consideration. So, write me a comment down below or on Twitter, making sure you @ me, using this word in a sentence, or a little story, whatever you like. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. You really are awesome. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.